So Chamtrul Rinpoche was in town and he gave us a lecture about dream yoga. I really like dream yoga and I thought it would be really nice to make a video about what happened there and what he taught us. Just to give you this, this like introduction, this sniff, this taste of the Tibetan Buddhist culture and their practices about being conscious in the dream. So here I am doing this. But before we start, we should probably say a few words about Chamtrul Rinpoche because I've never heard about it before. Maybe you have. But let me just read here a few things about Chamtrul Rinpoche just to get a taste, just to understand who he is really. So the way this goes in Tibetan Buddhist culture, usually they find someone and they recognize he was an incarnation of a different master before. And this was the case in Chamtrul Rinpoche. So he was recognized as the third incarnation of a great teacher who was the head of a certain monastery in Tibet. Since the age of 14, Chamtrul Rinpoche started getting his training in Tibetan Buddhist culture. He was taught by two Dzogchen masters. He was practicing basically all of his life and he reached the highest form of meditation. He got the title of Khenpo, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, which is like a doctor of Buddhist philosophy. And since 1996, he started teaching others, going around the world. Right now he has a center in Dharamsala, India. Of course, if you ever end up in North India, check out Dharamsala. It's really full of Tibetan. It's really beautiful place. Anyways, his center is there in Dharamsala. He's teaching there. He's also going around the world and teaching and spreading the Dharma. There is more I can say about him, but this is, I think, enough of an introduction for now. We're going to put the link in the description if you want to get to know him more from the official website. So yes, we're going to talk about Tibetan Buddhism today. And again, just like to get this introduction, this light touch on the subject for what Chamtrul taught us. So along my own way learning about lucid dreaming, I stumbled upon this book, which was my first introduction to dream and sleep yoga, and was actually also my first introduction to Eastern spirituality. This book is by Tenzin Rinpoche Rinpoche. So as you can see, Rinpoche is a title that is given in Tibetan Buddhism, if I understand correctly. And this book was amazing for me. The techniques there I have been practicing for a while and they got me to really interesting experiences. I might need to make a whole video just about what I learned from this book and how it developed in my life. But for now, let's stick with Chamtrul Rinpoche. So before we head up to the techniques, I just want to say it was really beautiful that he actually came here to Israel and that it was actually arranged in this way that he could come and talk about dream yoga. It's a really nice atmosphere to have a Tibetan teacher come here and talk about these things and share his knowledge. And anyways, a really good friend of mine who was with me, Dafna Mordechai, she summed up really well Chamtrul Rinpoche's words, and I kind of have this on the screen now in Hebrew. I'm going to kind of like live translate it for you, and then we can see kind of one of the techniques from the Tibetan Buddhist culture of how to get conscious in the dream. How do they do it? How do they approach it in a more spiritual way? Let's begin. So basically he's talking about 3 stages. And the first one is the preparation. There's always a preparation. So he's talking about, first just talking about the mattress and the cushions. Just to see that if they're too comfortable, it might interrupt. If they're not comfortable at all, it might interrupt. So you don't want the pillows to be too soft or too hard. You know, it's just like the story with the bears. And kind of ring a bell for me because for some reason, I also like my pillow not too puffy. Just like nice. He's talking about the direction of the head, of the top of the head, that it's preferable if it will point to the east or to the north, and then the legs accordingly to the west or to the south, that it's better for the practice. And he says that even if you can situate your bed in this kind of way because the way your house is built, you can imagine that your head is to the east or to the north. I've heard about this before from different cultures, talking about sleeping and correct sleeping and even how it affects our lucid experiences. From what I remember, they were talking about the pulse of the magnetic pulse of the planet and how it affects the direction of the head. I don't think Chamtrul actually gave an explanation why. For my experience, I don't know, I didn't really try too much with this, but I don't make it like a big something, but it's good to point out. About time to sleep, he says that you can sleep during the day or during the night. It doesn't really matter. What's important is that you would have a certain routine, that you always sleep from this hour to this hour. And also he points out that it's best that people would sleep around 8 hours. He continues on to talk about right motivation. He says before you go to sleep, you would want to sit down somewhere, either in your bed or somewhere else in the house, and to look into your motivation. You have to be concentrated on a positive, compassionate feeling, loving kindness, quiet mind. To put yourself in this atmosphere of compassion and to train consciousness, to go towards helping all living things, which is a big thing in Tibetan Buddhism. So to sit on a pillow or the bed, just even for 1 minute, and just direct your consciousness towards that place. He explains that the night sleep could be a positive action, a negative action, or a neutral action, and that what affects this is our intent that we put out before we go to sleep. And so it is important to focus on positivity and to avoid negative feelings. So this is why we are sitting for this minute to just develop kindness and compassion and grace and a good heart and peacefulness and devotion before we go to sleep. He says that in each moment we can only be in one of those feelings, either positive, negative, or just neutral. And we are looking forward to be in the positive state before we go to sleep. To help develop this positivity before we are going to sleep, he gives us 2 types of visualizations that we can use to strengthen this. So one of them is by the Sutra and the other one is by the Tantra. So the Sutra one says that if you have a faith in a Buddha, he gives an example of a certain Buddha called Shakyamuni. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. So he gives an example that if you have faith to a certain Buddha, you can imagine him appearing in front of you. You see the body of the Buddha, which is the representation of compassion and wisdom. And he blesses you, blesses your body, your speech, your consciousness. You are to imagine this Buddha appearing in front of your head and this happening. He also mentions a certain mantra that we can use. I'm not sure if it's connected to the Sutra visualization or the Tantra visualization, or maybe you can use it for both of them. The mantra he mentioned, and then I'm going to pronounce it terribly, is Om Buddha Churma Surkesar. I'm going to write it down in the description if you know better than me. He says that you can repeat this mantra a few times or 100 times or maybe even more. And I think that he also mentioned, or maybe it's coming from me, that you don't have to have this specific connection to a Buddha. If you have a faith in anything, basically, you can use that visualization as well. At least for me, it makes sense. And also it makes so much sense that you would repeat a mantra for, let's say, 100 times, how, it continuously starting to change your consciousness quite rapidly, especially if you tie in with it emotions of compassion and well-being. Moving to the second visualization, the tantric visualization. And this I love because it really reminds me the practices from the book, The Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep, that I showed you before. And if this is your first time getting like an introduction into Tibetan Buddhism practices, you can see how many of the times it's just so specific. Okay, let's do this. You are to visualize a red sphere in the center of your throat with the syllable Ram, with a quality of warmth in the center channel. We're going to talk about the channels in a bit. The quality is warmth and it is like a fire. In the crown of your head, above the central channel, you are to visualize the syllable A. And it has the quality of cold, and it's in a white color, and it is like a nectar. And I like that he mentioned, usually in these practices, you use the Tibetan syllables. But he says, it doesn't really matter. It sounds like more what he's going for. It's the sound that matter. So you can visualize it in any language. The R, maybe it's just an A, maybe it's in your own language. It doesn't really matter. So you repeat the mantra that we said before, and we visualize that the heat in the first sphere, the fire sphere, the Ram, is intensifying and going up the central channel until it reaches the R, the white sphere. And then this heat, goes to the cold, and then it melts it. And this nectar from the R is now dripping down through the central channel like heat and water intermixing. And it creates this pleasant feeling. And we want to stay and focus in this energy and to preserve this pure motivation. You do this for just around a minute, and this is the preparation just before going to bed. But let's talk about the posture of sleeping. He's talking about a certain posture that is called the lion posture. I know this also from the book. It's a very famous posture in Tibetan Buddhism, kind of to develop awareness when you're going to sleep. So for men, it is said that you are to lie on your side, on your right side, when the body is comfortable and not tense. And you're going to take your right hand open and put it between the pillow and your face. So if it's possible, you can take this little finger here and kind of close the right nostril. If it's not comfortable for you, you don't have to do it. But the idea is that you will breathe only from the left nostril. So if it's not comfortable for you to block the right nostril, you can visualize as if you're breathing only from the left nostril. The left thumb will be on your thigh, and this is kind of the way that you would go to sleep in. And for women, it's the opposite. So you would lie on your left side, and you would put your left hand and kind of block with this finger if you can. And he gives a really nice indication about snoring. He says that there's nothing bad about snoring. But if you're in this position and you are snoring, it means something. It's like you can take it as an indication, because he says the breathing should be natural and smooth and peaceful. Once you're snoring, it indicates that one of your channels are not straight, are not aligned. So you might want to adjust your body a little bit. And when you see that you're not snoring, that is the indication that your channels are aligned. I really like this. Your eyes will be closed, but mentally you would imagine that they are looking upwards to the pure blue skies, to the pure space that is in front of you. So maybe the eyeballs would roll a little bit upwards, but again, naturally without straining. So the thing about the channels in Tibetan Buddhism culture, in the Tantra, they talk about three major channels that we have in the body. There is the central channel that we mentioned a little bit before, and there are two more channels to the sides. And if I remember correctly, this is a bit coming more from me and what I read in the book that I mentioned, is that the reason that men are lying on the right and women on the left is because the two channels on the sides are opposite in men and women. So for men, I think the negative energy, there's the negative energetic, the positive energetic, and then there's like the main, more like pure channel. So when you're lying on your right, when men are lying on the right, they kind of want to put this pressure is kind of blocking a bit of the negative channel. And women, they have the negative channel on the left side. So this is the idea of women lying on the left side and men on the right side. So we're talking a little bit about that, how for men, there is a certain blockage in a certain channel, and in women it's open, and vice versa. But something else that I really like that he pointed out was that he said, these are like the recommendations for someone who's just starting the practice. And he said, when you're advanced in the practice, you don't really need to sleep like that at all. And I really connect to that. I tried this posture before, I walked with it, but today I really feel like I can lie down in any posture that I would like, and usually it would be on my back, but it's just nice to see the flexibility and honesty coming from a master, I guess, or from someone who is well versed in these practices, and understanding that this process is forgiving and not as strict as maybe some of us would think, that we will have to go to the east and, kind of get this strict. So we're lying down, we have prepared ourselves, and now we are ready to start the main practice. So while we're lying, we are visualizing in the center of our hearts the syllable A again, in red color this time. And he points out again that it doesn't matter in which language it is, it's more about the natural essence of the syllable itself. This syllable in the center of our heart sits on a lotus flower, which is something that Tibetan Buddhism really likes to make use of a lot, this use of specifically lotus flowers. The lotus flower has 8 petals, and we will visualize it in the center of our heart. We will focus on it as much as we can, understanding that it symbolizes the nature of consciousness and the consciousness of the transcended beings. The nature of consciousness is emptiness. It is the lack of self and appearances. It's not that it is empty, like there is nothing there. It is full of light and clarity. They call it the clear light. It is the nature of consciousness that was never born because it is always present. So the main point here is to unite compassion and wisdom. And he's talking about from different perspectives how they see it as the union of nature with consciousness, or maybe from the sutra he said it is the union of appearances and emptiness. From the tantra it is the union of clarity and emptiness. From the higher tantra it is the union of bliss and emptiness. From the greater Dzogchen it is about the union of the knowing of thyself. So the syllable A represents all of these concepts. And what's important in the practice is to focus on this syllable while maintaining this intent. So we are lying there and we are doing this visualization of the syllable A on the lotus with 8 petals in the center of our hearts. And we have this intent going. And as we continue with this, after a while, we see how this syllable starts to emit a bright, strong light, stronger and stronger, and it starts to duplicate itself 21 times on the center channel, from the navel to the top of our heads. The light intensifies and the syllable starts to fill up our whole body. The whole body becomes this light, empty light. And it starts to glow, and then it goes outwards, and the room becomes glowing with this light, and the house, and the neighborhood, and the city. And so the entire world is filled with this light. And we pour it out to all directions like a sun. And after we just take all this outwards, it starts to go back in, like filter back inside our bodies. And all the appearances that we have just engulfed starts to be just this empty light nature that was never born and always present, and it's all just melting down back into our body. We put our attention back to the center of our hearts where the lotus is, back in the syllable, and we keep our faith and devotion to the Buddha Dharma Sangha, to the higher deities, like the Bodhisattvas. And as everything just comes back in, we see this lotus just closing in, and this symbolizes that we are falling asleep. And then he gives some really nice pointers. He says that sometimes you fall asleep before you finish this whole visualization. And he says, again, kind of in this forgiving way, that it's all right. It's best to do the whole visualization and then fall asleep, but if it happens, then it's all right. And on the contrary, if it's hard for you to fall asleep after doing this visualization, then you can change the location of the syllable and its color. You can imagine it as a red sphere in the center of your belly button. So instead of the heart, you move it here to the navel. And if this still doesn't work to help you fall asleep more, then you can move it to the palms of your legs. And this should help you fall asleep after doing this visualization. If you are falling asleep, but the sleep is very heavy and you don't even remember any dreams, what you can do with the visualization beforehand, you can move it from the heart to the throat. If dream comes, but they're not clear, you can move the visualization from the heart to the head, to the forehead, to above the head. He says when you move it upwards, it brings more lucidity, more clarity. So the original way of doing this is to imagine it in the area of the heart, but each one, he says, he points out, has to adjust it for themselves, because we all sleep differently, we're all very different, and I love how this is, so the variety, and shows the flexibility of it. I love this culture. Another thing that he points out is from this stage that we are preparing to go to sleep and practice, and also during the day, he says to tell ourselves that we are already dreaming, that we are already in the middle of the dream. We will, make this intention, this wish to hold into the intent of recognizing the nature of consciousness. So at the same night or during the day, both probably is best. When we know that we are going to practice, we are going to say to ourselves during the day, it's all a dream, it's an illusion, it's not real, I'm sleeping right now, and it's appearing on my consciousness. Everything is empty. The sounds, the feeling, everything is emptiness. And in this practice, we are imprinting on our consciousness during the day, and this will help us through the night. Right? And this is so common. We know this from different practices that we probably took this from the Tibetan Buddhism culture. Let's pause here for a second, because I should have said this when we started out. You know how science just officially proved lucid dreaming to be a thing in the beginning of the 80s, like 1975, 1980 something. It was proven scientifically, and then we started researching it. But the reason that it's nice to hear from this culture is because that they have been having this practice for thousands of years. They've been exploring consciousness for thousands of years. So it's kind of nice to, pay attention and kind of learn from their point of view. Because before science, there were a lot of mystical traditions, just like the Tibetan Buddhism, like the Toltec tradition, like shamanism, that have been practicing this ability of becoming conscious in the dream and using that usually for spiritual growth, way before we have proved it scientifically. And this part I really like. So he continues on. So the visualization is over, the lotus has been closed, and we are falling asleep. And now he describes what is happening. So he says, the different layers of consciousness are collapsing one into another as we're falling asleep. There is the gross consciousness, the senses, that they are collapsing into the mental consciousness, the conceptual consciousness, and that also collapses further into non-conceptual consciousness. When he points out there's still feelings there. So he says, if the conceptual consciousness has not melted down yet, it means that we are still not asleep. Conceptual consciousness being, our thoughts. If we still have our thoughts in this way, we can still make concepts, then we are still awake consciously. And this melts down further to the non-conceptual consciousness, where there is no thoughts in a way, but here there is also a division. There are feelings, and there is the basis of actually everything, the basis of nature of consciousness, as opposed to being conscious of this base itself. He continues on, if we have all the supporting conditions, we would have inner experiences, inner sights. He says that the first stage is called the stage of appearances, where you have an experience of a pure white light like the moon, which is filled with pure skies in the night time. And after that it would melt down to this red orange, and after that it's the stage of dullness. So you can see how this gets more and more abstract, and he continues to give kind of a structured explanation to this phenomenon. He says there are 3 or 4 types of emptiness, and there are 3 or 4 types of what they call clear light luminosity. So as I'm understanding this, like we said so before, we are talking about the union of emptiness and this clear light. He points out that if the practice is really, really successful, and you can get to the 4th stage of both the emptiness and the clear light luminosity, you will experience emptiness that is everywhere, and this clear light, which is the basis of consciousness, is also everywhere. He says sometimes we will not be able to experience their presence, but we might be able to identify it. And this is a very advanced practice. Right? He's actually talking about consciousness in sleep. Check out what he keeps saying here. Because usually we are talking lucid dreaming and stuff, we're talking about bringing consciousness to dream. And this is why I like, the Tibetan, when I read this book, I really liked it, because they're also talking about bringing consciousness into the sleep stages. So he keeps going, and he says, from the first core state of our senses and until the last stage of experiencing the clear light, which is the basis of everything, it's very similar, he says, to the border of death and after death. This practice can help us towards dying. So it's important to note again, just because we are having this introduction and there's a lot of concepts going on, that one of the major reasons in the Tibetan Buddhism to become conscious in the dream is to prepare ourselves for dying. Because what they say basically, as Chamtrul just mentioned, is that this stage when we are dying is similar in a way to the stage of dreaming. And if we can recognize ourselves in dreams, we can also recognize ourselves once we are dead. And I think he will talk about this a little bit later. So let's save it for then. If not, I'll put some commentaries about it myself. He points out that in actuality, it's very hard to experience this luminosity of the base and to identify it. As we are falling asleep, there is the stage when there are no thoughts, right? We're moving from conceptual to non-conceptual consciousness, and it's like blacking out. It's like fainting, right? How much similar is this for us, right? Every time we go to sleep, we just black out. And there are no dreams because the sleep is very heavy. So it implies that this whole experience is to bring consciousness into sleep, into this heavy sleep. And if we are able to do this, we experience it in this abstract way that he just mentioned. Only when someone is waking up a little bit, there is dreaming. He's talking about this in-between state, in this middle state, where dreams are starting to form when we are going out of the sleep. So this is exactly this conscious transition. He's actually explaining what is happening when we are making a conscious transitions. And if you've been following, and if you know me a little bit, you know how much I like conscious transitions and how I practice this. So I got so, connected to what he was saying. Not that I have this experience per se, but, he's basically telling you a good practice for becoming conscious in dream is to do this wild OBE, astral projection. This is just learning how to make a conscious transition into the dream. So we were talking about the preparation and what is happening as we are falling asleep, and now we got to this point of the actual practice in the dream, not before it. So he starts out by saying, when there is a dream, what makes it appear? What is dreams in a way? And he says there are two conditions for dreaming. It's achieving and projecting. He says that the first thing that brings about dreams is our habits, our imprints. It could be from this life, kind of like these dreams that we have right of our everyday life. And he also points out that it could be imprints from past lives. So maybe something that happened to us in the past life would come into our dreams and we'll make up a dream in that fashion, or maybe something from the day to day, from years before, and things like that. And this is where the work that we did before going to sleep really, changes that content, the motivation that we put out, the focus that we pointed out, what we did with the body, the speech, and the consciousness, and, having this wheel to identify that the dream is a dream. And then he goes on and he talks about these 5 stages of things to do in the dream and how it goes kind of one after another. So the first one, as I wrote here, was identifying, actually becoming lucid. And the second one is the manifestation. And then is the changing inside the dream. And then the practice of consciousness itself. And then afterwards to just reach this, nature of reality. Because this is really the point. This is the point in the Tibetan Buddhist practices of dream and sleep yoga, is to experience this pure consciousness, nature of reality. And I really like this, because when all this kind of meeting just started out, it was very formal, people give respect and then they stand before the teacher comes in. It's very, kind of like this Tibetan way of doing things. And he sits down and is talking, but more and more, as this meeting proceeds, you see how, and I was waiting to see this, because Tibetans are, they might be formal sometimes, but really they are like this, they have this childlike nature. They're like, basically like children inside the body of adults. And the more he continued to explain about everything, he just started to get more and more excited, as I am getting excited from everything here right now. And I was looking to see this in his eyes. You can see the spark from people talking about their lucid dreams and their experiences. And it was really fun. Anyways, so when we were talking about identifying how to become lucid, he mentions, the kind of like the basic stuff. He says that very, very good dreams or very, very bad dreams are good conditions to doubt and ask, is this a dream? Right? We know that a lot of first lucid dreams actually come from nightmares, because it's so bizarre, the situation, that we kind of ask ourselves, wait, is this actually happening? And then we figure, oh, it might just be a dream. So he also points out that very, very good dreams can be, oh, this is too good to be true. It might be a dream. He adds up that even a normal dream, if it repeats itself, it's also a good anchor for lucidity, for awareness. Or maybe you have a dream that continues from night to night, happens only in the night, but every time you go back to sleep, you continue on that dream. So he just points out a few ways, a few kind of characteristics for dreams that we can help us identify when we are dreaming. Then he moves on to the manifestation. So once we are already lucid, we know we're dreaming, what do we do? What do we do inside the dream? According to the Tibetan Buddhist culture. And he says that, basically, he says that we will look the same way that we look here in this body in the dream. So if I am a woman, I would look like a woman in the dream. If I'm a man, I would look like myself as a man in the dream. Even though that it's just a dream and, it's not as tangible as this life. It just comes from this force of habits, like our energetic structure, kind of like, you remember this structure of the body, then we also dream ourselves there, even though we don't have to. And this is what he says, when you recognize that you're in the dream, you can swap. Why not? If you're a man, why not try to be a woman? If you're a woman, why not try to be a man? Or an animal, or anything else, basically. It doesn't have to be a human body. Without lucidity, he says, it is nearly impossible, because there is a habit that will not allow us to change in the dream to a different being. It is because we have a strong, solid belief in things. But once we get lucid, once we have this awareness, this change becomes possible. But this leads on to the third step, which is changing, right? And he says, once you've become an animal or a man or a woman, try to change it even to something else. Try to be a god, try to be a demigod, or try to be a hungry spirit. These are kind of classifications that they have in the Tibetan Buddhism culture. But the point is that to show that you can emerge in these deities, become these godlike figures and experience it. And when we do this, we start to really, shake our consciousness of what is solid and what has structures and what's not. And then we take it even further. So the fourth stage about, consciousness practice is basically about duplicating and increasing. So he says, usually we are one. I mean, one in the sense that I'm just one body, right? But in the dream, you can duplicate itself. So the dream is an illusion, he says. In the dream, we can appear many times because there is no substance, there is no realness in it. There is no solidity like we have here. So he says, I can duplicate myself 100 times or to 100 different beings if we want. And then to melt myself, to decrease myself back into just one being. And this is a kind of a practice of consciousness to do in the dream, to kind of break down this kind of thought, this conditioning that we are just one individual, that we can inhabit only one body. We want to melt down this belief. and understand that the true existence that we have is emptiness, once we understand that the appearance is illusory, then that's what's allowing us to duplicate ourselves like this. So you're seeing how the difference in what this culture is doing in the dreams really comes to just opens up our consciousness in that way. We're doing things intentionally against what we're used to, just to show the flexibility, the variety of consciousness, what we can really be, what we really are, just to, bring out the true nature of consciousness, not what we're used to, what we think that we can't do, that everything is so solid and just fixed. You see that it's not fixed. It can loosen up. You can do whatever you want. You can be whoever you want. You can be here as many times as you want. Eventually, it says, as the practice gets better, you can go to different lands. You can even visit what they call in Tibetan Buddhism, the Pure Lands, where you can get teachings from Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and ascended masters. And you remember this teaching when you wake up afterwards here in the morning. And he gives an example of a certain guru or a teacher that maybe, I don't remember exactly, maybe it was a Tibetan Buddhist master, that he was teaching something to the students, and there was a bit of a misunderstanding from the text, from the sutras that he was teaching. And he wasn't sure himself, so what he did basically, in his dreams, he went to the Pure Lands and he found the exact master that wrote that exact text. And he asked him, explain to me what you meant when you were writing it, because, the way you wrote it, we were not really sure what was the meaning behind it. And the master taught him, he told him the message, he told him what it was meaning. And then when he woke up, he could teach this back to the students. How beautiful is this? I know there's a lot of things coming to mind when you're hearing this. But there are some experiences that I can relate myself that you really just feel that you got genuine information. Take this where you want, but according to what Chamtrul says, I can really relate to this. And even, when you're talking about going to Pure Lands and meeting Buddhas, when this is your practice, and if you are not connected to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, you can really just take it and meet whoever you want, who you think is a high spiritual teacher, or maybe for any means that you desire. Afterwards, Chamtrul gives an example of his own lucid dream that he had, and this is where you really see him get excited now, when we all get excited when we're talking about our lucid adventures. So I'm going to try to recite it from what I remember. Basically, it started out when he was falling asleep in a meditation, intentionally falling asleep while cross-legged. And he wakes up in a dream, understanding that he's dreaming, and he is in his, let's say, center, maybe somewhere like it was a house or something like that, a structure. And he understands that he's dreaming. And then he starts flying up. He wants to fly. This is the first thing that comes to his mind. He flies up, and flies outside of the structure, of course. And then while he's in the air, he thinks to himself, if I remember correctly, that, hey, he wants to fly with the whole center. So he goes back into the center, and then the whole center starts flying with him. And he starts swirling around with it and do some tricks like that. And then afterwards, while he was flying, he flew towards one of the mountains near where he stays. And he thought about going around the mountain, but then he said, wait, it's a dream, it's all illusory, it's not, solid, why not go through the mountain? And that's what he did. He went through the mountain with everything, I guess. And it's really nice, right? It shows you again this, how our physical behavior sometimes in the dream, we think we have to do something physically, but then when we remember that we're in the dream, we have this dream-like quality, then we know that we don't have to act the same way. And he keeps going, and he says that he wants to go to the Pure Lands. So he points out all the time that it just takes, an intention. And once you direct an intention in the dream, it happens immediately, as we know as well. So he gives out an intention to get to the Pure Lands, if I remember correctly. And what happens, he starts flying up. And maybe it was even like flying very fast or flying into space, I think. But then he stops himself. And he says, oh, I'm so stupid. He says how again physical is this way of thinking that he has this experience of going to the Pure Land. Like there is an actual way that you need to go, but actually you are in pure mind in this kind of non-physical realm. So you don't really have to have this experience of going in order to get to. You can just emerge there. And I think this continues on when he wanted to maybe he had this thought and then he wanted to get to the Pure Lands like that, or maybe he wanted to experience the nature of reality, but then he woke up afterwards. So just pointing out again that these stages, usually you can do them when you're practicing officially. You can do them one after another, and slowly it will help build your practice. If you start out and you jump to try to duplicate yourself, for example, then it will probably, maybe, I don't want to limit anyone, be a little bit hard. So if you start with the manifestation, you change your body, stuff like that, and then you move on, then it's easier for the consciousness, for the mind to get used to it from just jumping towards a certain goal. But he also says, it doesn't have to be in this order. Again, this flexibility. Well, if you've already experienced it, it doesn't mean that every time that you become lucid, you have to go through all the steps one after another. So you learn your way around it. This is it, basically. I hope this was a good introduction for the culture of Tibetan Buddhism and their practices, how to become conscious in dream and sleep. And I hope that if this inspired you, that you would check out the book, at least, Tenzin Rinpoche's book. I really recommend it. And again, I might just do a video about this. Again, I'm putting a link in the description for Chamtrul Rinpoche if you want to check him out, if you want to see and meet him in one of his workshops. For me, one of the things that I really took from this meeting was that it showed me that you actually don't have to be a monk. You don't have to be someone who lives in a monastery or a cave. I'm not saying this in a negative way, but it shows how you can actually have this Western, kind of way. And still, if you have this practice in your life, you can really reach high levels of experiences that can change your mind and expand your consciousness. Because I think a lot of us who are advanced lucid dreamers, a lot of us who take this as a big part of their life, had an experience like Chamtrul Rinpoche gave out, not to belittle his experience, but just to show that if you are serious about this practice, if you make it a part of your life, if you enjoy it, then you can really use it and explore new territories. My name is Ohad Habshush, and you're watching Beyond Lucidity, and I'm happy to do this video for you to kind of expose you to the culture and the practices that I really like. If you enjoy and love this kind of content, please like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who you think might enjoy it as well. You can also follow Beyond Lucidity on Instagram to get more updated. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I really appreciate it. Until next time, my friends, stay lucid, stay aware, keep on exploring. Bye. I completely forgot the last bit, which is probably the third part, which is gratitude. Yes, after you finish the practice, you should offer gratitude because there is virtue in the practice. And what is coming in Tibetan Buddhism is to offer this virtue for the benefit of all beings. Chamtrul Rinpoche even knows that if you have done the practice, but you still did not get lucid, you did not become aware in the dream, still in the practice, in this intention, there is virtue. And still, after you finish the practice, please be grateful and offer it to the benefit of all beings. He even says that if you do the practice and you don't remember any dreams, there's nothing happening in your memory, then even that, afterwards, when you finish the practice, you can there's still a virtue that you work yourself to make this happen. So please dedicate it to the virtue of all beings. Maybe we can dedicate this video also to the virtue of all beings, which is beautiful. And lastly, since we're already here, something that I would really like to emphasize is the difference of what we do once we get lucid in the dream. Once we have the lucidity, we have a choice. But still, what is that choice? What do we choose to do when we are in this stasis? Think about this. And that's it. Bye-bye. Thank you. And bye. For real this time. Go sleep. Go dream. Bye-bye. Bye. No. Wait, actually, there is more. It's been days already, and then I listened to this great podcast with Andrew Holchak and Claire Johnson. I'll put it in the link. And then they said something, because they mentioned the Tibetan Buddhism culture, of course, that I completely forgot to mention, which is extremely important. And it is that we just said it's going to be an introduction, but basically what the Tibetan Buddhists use dream yoga for, like the main reason, is to actually be conscious at the time of dying. The whole practice is actually to be able to become conscious at the point of death. So something really nice that Chamtrul Rinpoche mentioned that I've never heard before was that he said, because basically what they say is that the nature of the experience after we die is in somewhat similar to the nature of the dream. So what he said was, it was very encouraging in my point of view, and I really liked hearing it, is when we die, it's actually compared to recognizing when you are dreaming that you are dreaming. So when you die, recognizing that you have died is actually, for the practiced mind, is actually easier than to recognize when you're dreaming. But when you die, you only have one chance to recognize it. But when you're dreaming, so to become aware that you're dreaming while dreaming is harder, but you have one more chance and one more chance and one more chance. So you have many, many chances each time that we go to sleep, compared to dying, which is easier, I guess, to recognize than dreaming, but you only have one chance. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. This is all, I think.